Okay, hello everybody, and thanks for tuning in. I'm broadcasting live from the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore because we have a lot of events happening at the same time. I'm actually attending the Milken conference, and then the Bloomberg conference will be in shortly after. So I normally don't wear a suit. I my first time wearing a suit probably in 610 days. Thank you very much for joining us. I think when the team said, can you talk about some of the ideas about scaling and growing technology businesses, we were very excited to share some of that knowledge. I have with me today Gervin. Gervin's a director with our firm. He's Filipino, proudly Filipino, as well as Wancho, and that is the nucleus of our two-man team, fully dedicated to the Philippines. My name is Hian. As a quick background, I've been doing technology either as an entrepreneur or an investor for 21 years now. I'm Singaporean. If you've watched the Asian Food Channel on Sky Cable, that was the company that I started and successfully exited before I became a venture capitalist. And Philippines is a very close place for me in my heart. It was the place that welcomed us very strongly when we launched Asian Food Channel. And so I've always had the understanding of how attractive the Filipino market is to just doing business in general. So without further ado, let's go into the topic of the day, which is that the time is now for Filipino startups to actually take off. And I think we can make that representation because we've been quietly looking at the Philippine market for almost 4 years now. And about 3 years ago, we invested into a company called Kumu. So we're proud to say we were the first investor, institutional investor, into Kumu for outside Philippines. Before that, it was backed by the JG Group and some amazing angel and early stage investors. But we were the first to come in and say to everybody that watch this space, Philippines as a market, live streaming as a market. So I think it's for us, we do believe that the time is now for Philippine startup to scale. But the challenge is, I think you guys are sitting down thinking, how does one actually scale a business? So we wanted to address that today. And if it's the one thing that we just wanted to, because time is limited, focus everybody's attention to is really the 4 fundamental principles about how one scales a product. And I will go through very quickly why these 4 are very important. So the first thing is the total addressable market, even before you start a company. You must really think about whether something is scalable and the size of the business. You know, when we invested into Gojek, we did that simply because we knew that this was a fundamental product the Indonesians understood, which is taking rides at the back of a motorcycle. But the opportunity to really, really scale that up was significant. The opportunity to make that into a thing that could also have e-commerce food delivery, the total addressable market is significant. And you really need to think about when you're starting your company, the problem that you're tackling, is it really a huge product? And it could be a Filipino problem, it could be a regional problem, but you've really got to understand that that's the case. Now, this slide tells you, and just really to confirm, that actually if you look at it from a user perspective, Philippines is actually the second largest market in Southeast Asia. Now, you should not confuse this with GDP, or you cannot confuse that with overall sort of economic activity. I think Thailand and Singapore have got very large economies. But think of some of the services that can be built in the Philippines today, which attract the very fundamental infrastructure problems. I think credit, fintech, e-commerce, logistics, these kind of things where there's 100 million people. And of course, the one that we identified very quickly was media and live streaming. And that's why we think that Philippines is a market that's big enough to scale, from 1 to 10 to $100 million. But you really have to think about the product that you're trying, the total addressable market. And once you get that correct, then you go to the second principle, which is you got to get the product absolutely correct. And I'll tell you this, 9 times, even 10 times of the 10, the initial product that you do is not necessarily the product that ends up being the winner. I want to pass it over to Gervin. he's been behind one of our amazing companies called Bioformus, and maybe he can give a bit of perspective about our product in this short summary.
Yeah, thanks, Hian. I think now it's storytelling time. So just a bit of a background, right? Bioformus is a remote patient monitoring tool, and their customers are mainly, obviously sick people and also hospital systems, especially in the U.S. Now, when the founder started the company, his problem statement was very simple. How can I help doctors look at and keep track of their patients all the time and make sure, me as a doctor is directing them to the right type of drugs or therapies at the right time? And the solution that he has built was basically put sensors in the body of the patient and then track that using a smartphone or a computer and get the providers or healthcare workers on site as fast as possible if the patient needs them. So from a problem statement perspective, it is on point. Hospital systems in the US love the idea. They all tried the idea, but sooner rather than later, they all found out that the solution, although it was just an MVP, had some very, very peculiar problems that needed to be addressed right away. One of which was that the sensors were being put on the patient's body using adhesives, and that was causing skin rashes for some patients. There were some that were using smartphones that didn't update their apps on a regular basis, or maybe had spotty internet connection, and that's why the company had to reinvent how they connect their sensors to the doctors. And there were many more problems, but the good thing about Bioformus, and I think this is very, very crucial to why they were able to raise a Series C money with SoftBank, was because they listened to their customers, they acted on all of those suggestions and problems right away, and continuously improved their product, week after week, months after month. And today, Bioformus's MVP, when they first launched, is completely different from what they are offering in the market. And it was a journey. It was a 3-year journey of them collecting all of the feedback they've been getting from their clients and putting them all in to their products and to offer them to the market as fast as possible. So that's something I think most startups tend to forget. Your customers, especially the ones that are complaining, are the right people to talk to, and take their suggestions wholeheartedly and put all of your efforts into your product and get them going right away.
So another way of thinking about it is that you've got to get to a point where your product is not just a nice to have, but an absolute must have. And in the case of Kumu, which we're so proud of because we backed these guys right from the get-go, it was very clear. For some people, especially those Filipinos who are living overseas, Kumu was that lifeline, was the absolute lifeline to reconnect to their culture. And so if you've got your total addressable market, and if you work hard on your product, and one day you realize, actually, my product is a must-have. The third thing we have seen so many times when it comes to scaling, and I think this becomes, the point that is, I feel like the first 2 points that we just made are sort of, you've heard them so many times. I think this one, people have heard about it many times, but I really want to be very, very granular about it, is you've got to find the right team. So how many times have you heard people say you've got to find the right team, and then they walk away? But what does it mean when you say you've got to find the right team? Well, the reality is that you should be hiring people in the places which you're actually not very good at. And there are so many things that you're not good at when you first started. And just like same with Openspace, there's a lot of things that I don't know how to do as well as, say, Gervin and Wancho. How do you attract those people? So one of the things that Kumu needed was a growth hacker, scaler, as well as a chief financial officer. And you have to start thinking about how you're going to get these people in. And the reality is the most talented people in the world have got options. And why would they leave Google or Facebook or a large Filipino conglomerate or bank or Goldman Sachs to come and join your foolhardy experience? Well, the answer is you've got to really find not just the best of the local people, but the international people that attract them. And a lot of times it is a bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When Bioformus received $100 million investment from SoftBank, when Gojek received not just investments from us, but like suddenly KKR, Warburg Pincus, all these guys, great people started to turn up. So I think the scaling problem you really need to think about is the signaling that you provide to the market. And thankfully, when you have great investors behind you, people start to turn up and say, this thing's getting real. But what we do at Openspace is actually, we've been fortunate because we have a team of people on the ground to actually help these companies. And maybe, Gervin, you can talk about how we got 2 people onto the Kumu team and, demonstrate that I feel like the best thing to have is to have investors that really have your back in terms of the hiring. And trust me, those 2 people were not I did not do anything about it. It was Gervin and Wanjo who worked with the teams to get these 2 spectacular people onto Kumu.
Yeah, so just echoing what Hian said, right? Don't limit yourselves with just local talent. Find the right people all over the world who's into your mission, who's into your vision, and attract them to join your team and solidify whatever you guys are doing, right? And it may sound very, very tough at first, but once you get your traction in place, once you get people to trust your product and also love your product, sooner or later, people start to turn up. Capital also starts to turn up. But I guess what we want to just give some concrete ideas here is for Kumu, right? I think many of you know that Kumu managed to bag one of the most sought after product development talent globally in the name of Crystal Wijaja. So Crystal was previously from Gojek. The funny thing is, she joined Gojek when it was also a Series B company, if I'm not mistaken. It was also the time when Gojek was about to really do its liftoff. And she was instrumental in making sure that the company was ready in terms of not just measuring, but also getting insights to all of the data that was coming into the company. And sooner or later, her understanding of all of this data has transformed into full product growth. And back when Kumu was also trying to understand how a data-centric organization should be built, we actually introduced them to a program called Reforge in Silicon Valley. And one of the mentors there was Crystal. And they worked together for the longest time, and Crystal helping out the company for the longest time. And through that mentoring process, they built trust with each other. Sooner or later, when we said that they are ready to hire their first chief product officer and chief growth officer, Crystal Wijaja's name always popped up, right? And that's why for us as investors, what we do is we empower the founders to get what they need. And what we did was that we gave a call to Crystal and tried to make her buy in to the full story of Kumu. And it wasn't a hard thing to do. She knew what was going on in Kumu from day one.
Well, she did ask a lot of difficult questions about how serious Openspace and who's backing you guys and who is the other people who are looking at the company. I mean, Crystal's a smart cookie, and maybe to Gervin's point is that you need to have people around you as a founder, investors, advisors, team members who can attract even better people. And that's the only way you're going to get to scale.
Yeah. And another one is Mark Velasquez, right? So Mark Velasquez is a very well-known investment banker in the Philippines, and he has done multiple transactions, very big ones in the country through his former bank that he worked for. Now, when we gave a call to Mark to see how interested he is to join Kumu, just like being a typical investment banker, he did a full slew of due diligence on the company. And we walked him through for every single metric of the company to make sure that he completely understands the stage of the company, why we need a person like him and why he is the right fit for the company. Sooner or later, when that was established, we introduced them to Roland and Rexy, and they clicked. You know, they liked each other from a personality perspective. They liked each other from a vision perspective, and the working styles complemented each other so well. Hian always says that Mark is the guy who wears a tie into a meeting, and that's exactly what Kumu needed at that point in time.
Yeah. That's such a good way of putting it.
Yeah, so you know, we're very happy of how Kumu has built a team, not just of with the best local people that we can find, but actually the best people that we can find globally. And I think this is a very good example for everyone to imitate, or at least have a view for.
So I'll try and round up point number 4 in about 45 seconds. So leave some time for question and answer. But actually, in some ways, we've left the best for the last, which is capital. If you get these first 3, then you get these kind of what we call super aggressive capital that helps you scale. Because the reality is that, you know, it's really about a slingshot. If you think of a slingshot, you put a lot of energy in the slingshot, but the stone's not going to move. And then one day when you let go, the stone pushes forward. One of the scariest things when you scale up, and we've seen this countless of times, from Gojek to FinExcel to even, you know, Kumu, is that you'll put a lot of capital to work in. And initially, it looks like nothing really is coming back on the revenue perspective. Do you have the right investor who has the faith for that? And so we saw that Kumu was getting there. In fact, in the case of Kumu, it was even better. The revenues were coming in. But behind the scenes, we helped Rexy and Roland get the best possible investor who has done this 10 times more than us and really knew how to do this, and that was General Atlantic. All I can say is that there was more than one person who wanted to invest, but we were really proud that General Atlantic was the one that the company chose, and we put the scale behind it. So I'll leave it as that. I think hopefully that gives you a framework of understanding there is a method to the madness. Please reach out to us. This is what we do full time. We don't do this anything else. We get our companies to scale. We've got a track record of doing it. And thank you very much for your time. And maybe Wancho, we can have some questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Gervin, Hian, for that talk. The first question is, so coming from the audience, the first question is, if you were to rank, right, where does the Philippines stand among its neighboring Asian countries in terms of producing high potential tech startups? I know it's impossible to rank, but I guess with our regional perspective, Hian or Gervin, if you'd like to take this question about, you know, where we stand versus the other countries.
Gervin, go ahead.
No, to be honest, I think that the quality of startups that the Philippines is producing can go, you know, arm in arm with the likes that we're seeing in Indonesia and Vietnam. I think the main difference that we see though is for Indonesians and for Vietnamese, there's always this dream that they can get out of their country and, you know, do something else, let's say in the Philippines or Thailand or many other industries, or you know, instead of going a regional expansion, they do a you know, attack on different industries within their countries. Now in the Philippines, it's more singular in nature, meaning it's very focused. They want to, you know, fix logistics, so they just do Philippines logistics, and it's not a bad thing, actually. Focus is always a good thing, but thinking bigger and thinking in a more grander mission is something that outside capital typically wants to see, right? And that's the main difference that we you know, typically encounter when dealing with Philippine versus Indonesian startups.
I'll put it another way. I presume that question comes from a founder. Is that correct, Wancho?
Yes.
The question you have to ask yourself as a founder is, do you have a fighting chance to be successful in the Philippines better than any other place in the world? I would argue absolutely at this point in time. You've got less competition. You've got white hot spaces that you can innovate. The total addressable market is big. Look at Rexy and Roland, what they did in Kumu. If they did live streaming in China, what kind of competition would they have? the market is yours right now because people haven't really figured it out, but the money is coming. Don't ever worry about who's better in whatever region. Focus on what you do best. And I'll tell you this, Philippines as a market is ripe for exploitation. Juancho, how much time do we have left?
We have
Can we do another
10 more
question?
minutes.
Oh, we
have.
so we actually have 10 minutes. Okay. I'm
Yeah,
getting
we have a
worried.
lot of
Sorry
time.
about that. No, so I
Yes.
think that's the key thing. And the same cannot necessarily be said about smaller markets and smaller places. Like if you start up a company in Singapore, you have to think regional and global from day one. I think Philippines now has attracted significant attention in the past 6 months. Not just us, but Warburg Pincus just put $300 million into Gcash. And as investors, they're also concerned about the relative valuations. And I think that my guess is that in the months and years to come, more and more attention will be applied to not only Philippines, but Vietnam and Thailand.
That's a perfect lead off to our next question, which is, again, coming from a founder. And the question is, being inside of Kumu and seeing how they've grown and, being familiar with Gcash as well, what do you think does the Philippines or do Philippine startups need to try to replicate sort of that growth trajectory from our experience with Kumu? I guess rephrasing the question, if there were some things that we saw with Rexy and Roland in their early days to what they are today, what would we advise founders to emulate?
The way I look at it is that there's two things, right? You need to have great volcanic soil and you need to have a great papaya seed. If you put that in there in 3 days, a big papaya tree will turn up, right? If you've got a great seed but terrible soil, you're not going to be good. If you've got great soil, no seed, then the thing about that really, really scared the hell out of me when I saw Kumu was how laser focused the founders understood the market and the consumers they were spending, that they were serving. That was quite scary. What was terrifying was that the soil was like the richest, most volcanic soil I ever seen. The adoption curve of that product, that time had come. Everyone had mobile phones and everybody wanted to use them to listen and to do things. And the 4G networks were there. So you really have to understand that for things like maybe Gcash as well, we can't comment because we're not in there, but certainly for Kumu, once you have the time is right and you're laser focused on the product, the growth comes. Now, the challenge I see a lot with people is sometimes they take a lot of money because, I don't know, maybe they come from famous business schools or they need people, but they don't actually get the growth and they panic. And then what they do, and this being scaling up being the topic, is they throw money at the problem and the cohorts are not working and they're just burning money on marketing. And I think that's when the investor becomes very important to pull people back and say, it's not working. And go back and fix the fundamentals. And if it is product, don't put the marketing money until the product works. I'm currently in a live situation right now in Indonesia where I think the market is great. The product is not quite there yet. I've told the team, don't market. They think I'm nuts. But I said, hold back. Go fix your product and until it's a slam dunk product, and then you market. And I think these are the things that we saw very early in that team and the traction, and it can be done in the Philippines. Gervin, I don't know whether you want to add to that.
No, I think you pretty much laid out everything. One thing that I do remember though, Hian, remember when Roland and Rexy went to our office a few years ago, and then you told them that you need this one, and this one for your product to work. And then in 3 weeks, they came back and said, we signed a contract with this guy, we have an agreement with this guy, and we are very, very close to getting this guy on board to make the product work. And that was the one that really said that, okay, these are the founders that we want to back. They were so laser focused and they knew how to make things happen, and
there is no other better way of convincing investors, I guess that's what you're saying, by showing absolute execution. I do remember that I said to them, you should do that. Within a week, they came back. It's very impressive. And just stay focused as a founder. That's your sole job to do.
Okay. Well, we have time for one last question, and again, it's related to Kumu, which isn't a surprise. The question is, how do you know it's time to hire more or better talent? Because we're seeing a lot, of top-level talent in Kumu right now, and being on the inside, I guess a founder, the founders want to know, when did we know it was the right time to actually spend and allocate capital to talent versus spending it towards growth or marketing or all of the other things that a business needs?
It's a very good question. I'll go first. And I think it's a very terrifying situation because being an ex-founder, you know how much this costs, you know how much ESOPs you need to give. It's a big bet. I think first and foremost, find an investor who's done it before and find an investor that encourages you to make that bet. I remember, and this is not Kumu, like we got to a point where we wanted to hire a head of sales for one of our startups, and the guy wanted more money than the CEO in the first place. And I said to the CEO, I said, you got to hire this guy. And he says, yeah, but he's more expensive than me. I said, listen, if you use the budget that you're paying yourself now, we'll have I said to him, if we pay him the market price, we might get a 50% chance we're correct. We might have to hire 2 people before we get the right person. But I guarantee you, if we use your salary compensation right now, the probability of getting a good guy is 0. Right? And so you just have to go and do it. And of course, after that, we raised more money, that the CEO got paid more, but obviously he owns a lot of the company. That's all I can say is, work with investors who really know and have done this before. I cannot stress this more. I've been on boards where people freak out, investors freak out, and they choke, and it causes a lot of problems. Work with the best investors on this. And then, you scale up when you're ready to scale up. When the product is on fire, you need more capabilities. And the same goes with product. When we signed the contract for ABN sort of cooperation with Big Brother, I mean, the founders came to us and goes like, we've never spent this much money on a single purchase of a media format. My response to them was, it's going to be the best investment you'll ever do. Please go ahead and do it. They actually needed the reassurance. So find supportive people around you who've done it before, and you'll find that you will have a better chance. You don't get it right all the time. Better chance of scaling and going fast. Gervin?
Yeah, mine is a bit more practical here. I would say that the truth be told, when we pulled the trigger on hiring, those key C-level team members in Kumu, we already knew that funding was coming, and we knew because the metrics were great. They were doing extremely well. They got the product right, and it's just a matter of time before the next round of financing will come in. So when
but you had the foresight though. It was like
no, because we knew,
right?
Because,
right?
Yeah. Because we already knew that funding was coming, whether or not an outsider would come in to fund Kumu. We knew that we wanted to put in, we wanted to invest more and back these guys more. So we kind of knew that financing will not be a problem for the company, and that's why we wanted to make sure that the company remains that way, that it is very attractive business for everybody who would want to invest in it. And one of the key pillars of that is obviously talent, right? So we need to keep on upgrading the talent, and that's why we pulled the trigger on Kumu's hiring for C-level guys.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Hian and Gervin. I know there are a lot more questions in the crowd, but we're going to be here at Philippine Startup Week all week. Drop by our booth. We also have a talk coming up with our operations team this Wednesday. We've always been very supportive of the Philippines, so just feel free to drop by our booth and say hi. I don't know, Hian or Gervin, if you have any last words before we close off.
I have a podcast with 2 other venture capitalists called the Unreasonable Podcast. Please get onto the Unreasonable Podcast and listen. You can hear much more, and not just us, other venture capitalists who think like us. It is a great time to start in Philippines. Good luck, everybody. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. Thank you very much for your time and attention. This is Hian signing out. Peace out. Gervin, Wancho, thank you very much for continuing the journey in the Philippines.
Happy Startup Week, everyone.
Yeah.
Unreasonable podcast. All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.